My brother's voice was shaking when he called me at sunrise. Mom died last night, he said coldly. The funeral is Friday. She left everything to me. You get nothing. For a moment I couldn't speak. Not because of grief, but because of what I was looking at. My mother was standing right next to me. Alive. Confused. And furious. I muted the phone and slowly turned toward her. Who is that? She whispered. I smiled. It's the man who thinks you're dead. And in that moment I knew something dark was unfolding. Something my brother never expected. Stay with us. This amazing story will leave you speechless. Before we get started, hit like, share and subscribe and drop your location in the comments. The phone rang at 6:12 a.m. That strange hour when the world is still, when decisions feel heavier, when news rarely comes without consequences. I was standing in the kitchen making coffee for my mom, who sat at the table flipping through a magazine. She always woke up early, always humming to herself, always finding peace in the slow quiet of the morning. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing warned me that within seconds, my entire understanding of family would shatter. I glanced at the caller ID. My brother. A surprise in itself, he never called unless he needed something. I answered anyway. Hello. His voice came through sharp, breathless and strangely rehearsed. She died, he blurted, skipping any greeting. Mom died last night. The words didn't sink in at first. I stared across the room at my very alive mother, who was tearing a recipe out of the magazine, glasses perched halfway down her nose. She looked up, smiling softly at me, unaware of the funeral he had already written for her. What? I whispered, lowering my voice so she wouldn't hear. What are you talking about? She's gone, he repeated, this time with a slow, exaggerated sigh like he was performing grief rather than feeling it. The funeral is Friday. I know this is hard, but I want to be honest with you. She left everything to me. You get nothing. My heart didn't break. It froze. Not because of his words, but because of how easily he said them. No hesitation. No sadness. No warmth. Just cold finality, like he'd been waiting to deliver this message. I pressed a hand to my forehead, turning slightly so Mom wouldn't see the tension building in my face. What do you mean she left everything to you? I asked softly. It's how Mom wanted it, he snapped quickly. She knew I needed it more. Don't make this difficult. Just stay out of it. I'll handle everything. Behind me, Mom cleared her throat. Sweetheart? Who's calling? I couldn't answer her yet. My brother's tone suddenly darkened. And don't show up on Friday. It's better for everyone. I muted the phone and lifted my eyes to the woman he had declared dead. She tilted her head curiously, waiting. In that moment something inside me clicked. Not fear, not confusion, but clarity. My brother wasn't grieving. He was planning something. And whatever it was, it had only just begun. I unmuted the call just long enough to tell my brother, I'll call you back, before hanging up. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from disbelief at how calmly he had tried to bury a woman who was very much alive. I turned toward Mom, forcing a neutral expression onto my face. She was still seated at the table, eyebrows gently raised, waiting for the truth she knew I was holding behind my lips. Who was that? She asked again, this time more softly. I hesitated before pulling out the chair across from her. It was him, I said carefully. He said something strange. Mom pushed her glasses up and leaned forward. Strange how? I exhaled slowly, trying to deliver the words gently. He said, you died last night. For a moment the world felt silent. Mom blinked. Once. Twice. Then a small, disbelieving laugh escaped her throat, the kind that comes from someone who thinks they misheard something impossible. He said what? I repeated it word for word. With each sentence her expression shifted, from confusion to shock to something deeper and more painful. Betrayal has a way of settling slowly, like a shadow creeping across a room. I could see the shadow forming now. Mom pressed a hand to her chest. Why would he say something like that? What reason could he possibly have? Her voice trembled, not from fear for herself, but heartbreak for the son she had spent a lifetime protecting, supporting, forgiving. She shook her head slowly, like she was trying to push away the memory of every sacrifice she had made for him. He sounded serious, I said quietly. He said the funeral is Friday. And that he inherited everything. The hurt in her eyes sharpened into something else. Clarity, then anger she rarely ever showed. "He's lying," she whispered. "He's planning something. I don't know what, but this isn't a mistake." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Her fingers were cold. "He told me not to come," I added. "He wants me completely out of whatever he's trying to do." Mom swallowed hard. "He's been distant for months," she murmured. "Secretive. Avoiding my calls. I thought he was just busy." She paused, wiping beneath her eyes before a tear could fall. "How could he do this to me? To us?" I didn't have an answer, not yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If my brother was willing to fake our mother's death, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of a betrayal far bigger than either of us imagined. Growing up, my brother and I had always lived on opposite ends of the same world, close enough to touch but never truly connected. I used to think siblings simply grew apart with time, but now, sitting across from Mom as she tried to process the cruel lie he had told, I realized something painful. The distance between us hadn't formed naturally. It had been built, brick by brick, through jealousy, resentment, and choices he made long before adulthood. Mom looked down at her hands, wringing them slowly. "You know, he wasn't always like this," she whispered, though even she didn't seem sure anymore. "He had a good heart once. I remembered those early years too. How he used to follow Dad everywhere, trying to be just like him. Ambitious, confident, admired. But when Dad passed, something shifted. Responsibility fell on all of us, but the weight seemed to crush him more than it shaped him. He started blaming everyone. Circumstances, family, fate. Never himself. Mom carried him through college applications, job failures, breakups, and money crises. Each time he fell, she extended a hand. Each time she extended a hand, he grabbed it without hesitation, and never once asked if she needed help too. But somewhere along the way he stopped seeing help as love. He saw it as entitlement. I could still recall one Christmas when Mom used her savings to help him cover rent. He accepted the money with a hug so hollow it barely felt human. Later that night I overheard him complaining on the phone that she didn't give him enough. That memory flickered in my mind now like a warning light. Mom sighed deeply. "Your father always said he needed time to find himself," she said, staring at nothing. But time just made him colder. There were countless moments that hinted at the person he was becoming. When he borrowed Mom's credit card without asking. When he sold Dad's watch, a family heirloom, and pretended it was stolen. When he disappeared during Mom's surgery, only to resurface days later with excuses and apologies that dissolved the moment she forgave him. He was good at disappearing. Even better at reappearing only when something was needed from us. "That call wasn't about grief," Mom whispered, suddenly breaking my thoughts. "It was about money." I nodded slowly. "He wanted me to believe you were gone so I wouldn't question anything." Mom's eyes filled with a sadness so heavy it felt like the room dimmed around us. "I raised him to be strong, not selfish. I don't understand where I went wrong." "You didn't go wrong," I said gently. "He chose this path." Mom exhaled shakily, a mixture of anger and sorrow settling into her expression. "If he's willing to pretend I'm dead," she said quietly, "then he's capable of far more than we realize." And as her words echoed in the stillness of the kitchen, I felt it too, a growing certainty that my brother's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was calculated. And it was only the beginning. After the shock began to settle, a new feeling took its place: urgency. If my brother was willing to announce our mother's death so confidently, then he wasn't acting on impulse. He had a plan. And plans leave traces. I opened my laptop and began searching immediately. Hospitals first. I called every major medical center within a 50-mile radius, one by one. Each time I asked for any record of Mom being admitted overnight, and each time the answer came back the same. "No, ma'am. No such patient. No admittance. No emergency call. No death certificate. Nothing." Mom sat beside me quietly, watching with a mixture of heartbreak and dread. "He didn't even try to make the lie believable," she whispered. "He didn't bother calling anyone." "He didn't need to," I replied. "He expected me to just accept what he said." And that was the part that stung the most. He thought so little of us, so little of truth, that he believed a single phone call would erase a living person. Next, I called the sheriff's office. If someone dies at home, especially suddenly, authorities must be involved. There would be a record, a report, a call log. The deputy checked twice. No deaths reported under that name. No calls from your family. Nothing unusual. I thanked him and hung up, my stomach tightening. The deeper I dug, the clearer one thing became. My brother had staged the entire thing. Mom rubbed her forehead. He didn't tell police. He didn't tell hospitals. He didn't tell friends. Her voice trembled. So who is the funeral for? Her question echoed through the room like a chilling breeze. I opened the funeral home directory and began calling local services. The third one answered with a familiar, practiced tone. Yes, he called us, the director said. Your brother. He requested information about a Friday service for your mother. But there was no body. No death certificate. He said paperwork was coming soon. I told him we couldn't schedule anything without proper documentation. My heartbeat quickened. Did he insist? Very, the director replied. He said it was urgent. He even asked if we could proceed without formalities. Mom covered her mouth in disbelief. Oh my God. I ended the call and turned to her. He's not just lying. He's preparing something illegal. Fraud. Identity documents. Maybe even fake signatures. A silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. Mom's voice, small, wounded, broke it. Why would he do this? Why pretend I'm dead? I swallowed hard. Because dead people can't protect their assets. Her expression changed instantly. Confusion turned to realization. Realization turned to something colder, resolve. He's trying to take everything. I nodded. And he thinks no one will question him. Mom straightened her shoulders, the softness in her fading. He's wrong. In that moment the atmosphere shifted. The fear was still there, but something stronger rose beside it. Determination. We were no longer reacting to his lie. We were preparing to expose it. The weight of everything we'd uncovered pressed heavily on both of us. The kitchen, once warm and familiar, now felt like the center of a storm neither of us were prepared for. Mom stood quietly for several moments, staring out the window as though searching for answers in the morning light. Then with a slow inhale she turned toward me. There's something I need to show you, she said softly. Her voice carried a gravity I wasn't used to hearing. Without another word she walked toward her bedroom. I followed, heart pounding, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal was important. Maybe even crucial. She knelt beside her dresser and pulled out a narrow box from underneath it. It was old, wrapped in a faded silk scarf I hadn't seen since childhood. She held it for a moment, her thumb brushing over the fabric as if gathering strength from the memories tied to it. I didn't plan to involve you in this yet, she murmured. Not until I had to. What is it? I asked gently. Mom lifted the lid. Inside was a single cream-colored envelope, sealed and carefully labeled with her handwriting. Updated will, to be opened if needed. I stared at it stunned. You changed your will? She nodded slowly. About a month ago. I didn't tell either of you. I didn't want to cause tension, especially not while your brother was already struggling with his life. Struggling. A kind way to describe a trail of bad decisions and quiet betrayals. Why didn't you tell us? I asked. Because I wanted to believe both of you would understand when the time came. And because, she hesitated. Because I knew he might react badly. I wanted the documents secured before anything happened. She placed the envelope into my hands. It felt heavier than paper should, heavy with consequence, heavy with secrets. It's notarized, filed, and fully legal, she said firmly. Your brother doesn't know it exists. He thinks everything is still under the old arrangement. I swallowed. Does he get anything? Yes, she said. But not everything. Not like before. There was no triumph in her voice, only sadness. A mother who had loved her son more fiercely than he ever realized was now forced to prepare for the worst. I slid the envelope carefully into my bag. Mom, whatever is in here, I'll protect it. She exhaled shakily, relieved. I knew you would. That's why I'm showing you now. If he's pretending I'm dead, then he's preparing to take control of everything. But he won't get far, not with this in place. A silence settled between us, quiet but powerful. Mom looked at me with a mixture of fear and strength. Your brother is not thinking clearly. He's desperate. And desperate people make reckless choices. I nodded, gripping the envelope. Then we'll stay ahead of him. For the first time that morning, Mom straightened her shoulders, no longer a victim of his lie, but someone ready to fight it. The war he started was about to turn. Barely an hour had passed since the first call when my phone lit up again. His name flashed across the screen like a warning signal. Mom and I exchanged a glance, hers filled with dread, mine with rising anger. This time I didn't answer right away. I let it ring twice, 3 times, hoping he might lose patience and hang up. He didn't. The 4th ring echoed louder, like it carried the weight of everything he was hiding. I finally answered. "What now?" I said, keeping my voice flat. His tone was different this time. Sharper, irritated, trembling with a frustration he hadn't bothered masking. "Why didn't you call me back?" he demanded. "I'm trying to handle everything alone and you're making this harder." I almost laughed at the absurdity of his accusation. "Handle what exactly?" I asked calmly. He exhaled dramatically. "The funeral arrangements. I told you, Mom passed last night. I'm doing my best, but you're not cooperating." Mom stood beside me now, arms crossed tightly. Hearing her funeral discussed while she was breathing right next to me sent a chill down my spine. "You didn't tell me how she died," I said quietly. He froze for a second, just long enough for me to catch it. Then he recovered with a story so rehearsed it sounded like a bad script. "She collapsed. Heart failure." "It was fast," he added quickly. "There's no point in dragging details out. Just accept it." My voice dropped lower. "Which doctor confirmed it?" Silence. Then a stuttering attempt at confidence. "Look, I don't have time for your questions. I'm telling you how it is. And listen carefully, I don't want you at the funeral. I really mean that." There it was again, that command, that entitlement. As if grief gave him power. As if lies became truth simply because he insisted. "And why don't you want me there?" I asked. "Because," he snapped, "Mom wanted peace. She didn't want arguments. She left everything to me and I don't want drama from you." Mom bit her lip, eyes glassy with disbelief. He was rewriting her wishes while she stood alive in her own kitchen. "Stay away," he added, voice hardening. "Do not interfere. I'll send you a message when everything is settled." Then he hung up. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words he had spoken. Mom sat down slowly, her face pale but her eyes burning with something fierce. "He's not grieving," she whispered. "He's rushing. He's hiding something." I nodded, slipping my phone onto the table. "He's desperate. And desperation makes people dangerous." Mom took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Then we need to be ready." And for the first time I realized this wasn't just deception. It was a countdown. By noon, Mom and I both knew we couldn't stay in the house any longer. Not with unanswered questions piling up like a storm on the horizon. We needed clarity, and there was only one person who could give us that. Mr. Halden, our family lawyer for nearly 20 years. He had handled everything from Dad's estate to Mom's medical directives. If my brother had tried anything, Halden would know. The drive to his office felt heavier than usual. Mom stared out the window the entire time, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't speak, but her silence told me everything. A son pretending his mother was dead wasn't just betrayal. It was a kind of grief all its own. When we arrived, Halden stood from behind his mahogany desk, his face etched with concern before we even spoke. "I didn't expect to see you two today," he said kindly. "Is everything all right?" Mom let out a shaky breath. "No," she whispered. "Nothing is all right." We sat across from him and I took the lead, explaining the phone calls, the fake funeral, the threats, and the eerie confidence in my brother's voice. While I spoke, Halden's expression shifted from concern to disbelief, and then to a quiet, simmering anger. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Your brother came to see me last week," he finally said. "He asked questions that raised concerns." Mom stiffened. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about expedited estate transitions," Halden replied carefully. "He asked what would happen if a will needed immediate execution. He wanted to know how assets were released, what documents were required, how quickly funds could be accessed." A cold chill crawled up my spine. Mom pressed a hand to her chest. "And you didn't tell me?" Halden sighed. "I wanted to. But legally he didn't commit a crime by asking. He claimed it was hypothetical and I didn't want to cause unnecessary worry. But now, he shook his head. Now I understand his intentions. I exchanged a look with Mom. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears but with an anger sharpened by hurt. Halden opened a drawer and pulled out a file. He tried to request preliminary asset information under the pretense of urgency. He wasn't entitled to any of it without proof of your death, of course. I declined to release anything. Mom swallowed hard. He truly believed I was gone. He was preparing, Halden corrected gently. Preparing for a transition he expected to happen soon, or planned to convince others had happened. I felt Mom's hand reach for mine. Her grip was tight, trembling. What do we do now? We stay ahead of him, Halden said firmly. You have the legal advantage. He has no documentation. And any attempt to force this will expose him. Mom nodded slowly, resolve taking shape behind her eyes. He wants to bury me, she whispered. But he's the one digging the hole. We left Halden's office with something we hadn't felt all day. Direction. But with direction came a new fear. My brother wasn't just lying. He was escalating. By the time we left Halden's office, a strange mix of anger and dread followed us like a second shadow. Mom walked slower than usual, her shoulders heavy with the weight of a truth no parent should ever face, that her own child was plotting her disappearance. But we weren't done. There was one more place we needed answers from, and it wouldn't wait. We should call the funeral homes, I murmured as I started the car. Mom nodded. If he really scheduled something, they'll know. The first two places had no record of him. But when I dialed the third number, the woman who answered spoke with a familiarity that made my stomach twist. Yes, your brother contacted us yesterday, she said politely. He was very anxious to arrange a Friday service for your mother. Mom inhaled sharply, her hand gripping the dashboard. I forced my voice to stay calm. What exactly did he say? He told us she had passed unexpectedly, the woman explained. He said he was too emotional to handle the details and asked if we could proceed with a simple preparation until paperwork arrived. Mom shook her head in disbelief, her eyes wide as she mouthed, paperwork? The woman continued, unaware of the storm her words were stirring. He insisted that timing was critical. He even asked if we could bypass certain formalities, since he was her only child. I felt heat rush through me. He said he was her only child? Yes, the woman replied. And he implied you were estranged from the family. He requested a private service with no guests. Mom gasped quietly, her hand covering her mouth. The betrayal hit her deeper this time, because lies about her death were one thing, but erasing me from her life? That was something darker. One more question, I said, my voice tighter now. Did he bring a death certificate? No, she said firmly. He claimed it was on the way. We informed him nothing can proceed without proper documentation. He seemed irritated. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat still for a moment, processing everything. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. He was planning to hold a funeral without me being dead. He wasn't even waiting for a real certificate. He thought he could make everyone believe it. I nodded slowly. He wanted to isolate me. He wanted full control. A fake funeral gives him an audience and a story. After that, anyone who questioned him would sound crazy. Mom's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. What replaced them was something sharper than pain. He's trying to erase me, she whispered. Erase us. I placed my hand over hers. Then we don't let him. For the first time since the morning began, Mom straightened her back with a strength that felt unshakable. He thinks he's writing the ending, she said quietly. But he hasn't seen what comes next. By the time we arrived home, the day felt heavier than any we had lived before. The sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across the living room floor. Shadows that stretched out like the consequences of my brother's choices. Mom sank onto the couch, exhausted not by age but by betrayal. I sat beside her, the envelope containing her updated will resting safely in my bag. We can't let him control the narrative, I said quietly. Mom nodded, though her eyes were distant, as if she were replaying memories she wished she didn't have. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Mom straightened, wiping away the weariness in her expression. If he wants a funeral, she said slowly, then we'll give him one. I looked at her, unsure if I heard correctly. She met my gaze with calm, steady resolve. We show up. You and I. Together. That single sentence, simple yet powerful, shifted everything. He'll be expecting you to stay away, I said. He told you to disappear from your own life so he could present whatever story he wants. And that's exactly why I need to be there, she replied. I'm done hiding from my own son. Her voice cracked on the last word, but her determination didn't falter. She leaned back and took a deep breath, regaining control the way only a mother who had survived heartbreak could. We need a plan, I said. And so we began. First, we arranged a meeting with Halden for the morning of the fake funeral. He would be there, documents ready, prepared to intervene if my brother attempted anything illegal. Mom insisted on being the one to confront him directly, but I could tell she took comfort knowing we wouldn't be alone. Second, we gathered evidence. Phone logs. Call records. Notes from the funeral home. Everything that painted the picture of a man attempting to commit fraud. Not out of revenge but out of necessity, because we didn't yet know how far he was willing to go. Third, we discussed how the confrontation would unfold. Mom practiced what she wanted to say, though her voice trembled every time she reached the words. Why did you declare me dead? I squeezed her hand. You don't owe him kindness in this moment, I whispered. You owe him truth. She nodded slowly. And you? She asked. What will you do when he sees you? I'll stand beside you, I said. And I won't look away. When we finished, Mom seemed stronger, still wounded, yes, but no longer defeated. The fear that had settled in her eyes that morning was replaced with something steadier. He's prepared a funeral for a woman who's still breathing, she said softly. Let's make sure he never forgets what life looks like. And just like that, the confrontation wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a promise. The morning of the funeral arrived with an unsettling quiet, the kind that clung to the air like fog. Mom and I stood in front of the mirror, both dressed in dark, simple clothing. She looked elegant, strong even, but I could still see the tremor in her hands as she adjusted her necklace. It was the one Dad had given her on their 20th anniversary, a symbol of a life she'd lived honestly, lovingly, unlike the lies being told about her today. Are you ready? I asked gently. No, she admitted. But I'm going anyway. We left the house in silence, the car ride filled with nothing but the low hum of the engine. Mom stared out the window, her jaw tightening whenever the funeral home signs along the road came into view. I reached for her hand and she squeezed mine tightly, more reassurance for herself than for me. As we approached the funeral home, cars were already parked in neat rows. People were gathering at the entrance. Neighbors, distant relatives, old friends of the family. They arrived dressed in black, holding tissues, murmuring condolences to one another. They believed a lie crafted by her own son. Mom inhaled shakily. They think I'm gone, she whispered. Not for much longer, I replied. We stayed hidden for a moment, watching the crowd. My brother stood near the doors wearing a perfectly pressed suit. His hair was neatly combed and he held a folded program in his hands. His expression was solemn, too solemn. There was no grief in his eyes, only performance. When he spotted new arrivals, he put on a show, hugging people, shaking hands, accepting sympathy like he'd earned it. He even dabbed at the corner of his eye a few times for effect. Each gesture tightened something inside my chest. This is unreal, I muttered. Mom nodded, her jaw clenched. He's using their sympathy as currency. Inside the building, the service room was dimly lit, soft music playing. A large framed photograph of Mom sat on a pedestal draped with white cloth. Flowers surrounded it, lilies, roses, carnations. A memorial display for a woman who was alive and breathing just a few feet away. Mom's breath caught. He bought flowers, she whispered. Like I'm actually gone. Before I could respond, my brother stepped forward. The murmuring faded as he cleared his throat and began speaking, his voice steady and dramatic. Thank you all for coming today, he said. My mother was an extraordinary woman. Her passing was sudden, unexpected, and devastating. I felt Mom stiffen beside me. He continued, spinning stories of conversations they never had, memories he twisted, gratitude he never once expressed to her face. He painted her life with colors he'd never cared to see when she was alive. Then he said it. She wanted me to handle everything. She trusted me with all her final wishes. Mom's eyes burned with disbelief. He was rewriting her life and her death. As he droned on, tears welled up in the eyes of those around him. He wasn't grieving. He was performing. Mom squeezed my arm. "It's time," she whispered. We stepped forward, walking slowly down the aisle between the rows of seated guests. People turned. Confusion spread like wildfire, whispers rising as more faces recognized the impossible. My brother continued speaking, unaware of the shifting atmosphere. Only when the room fell completely silent did he finally look up. His eyes locked onto our mother. Alive. Standing. Staring straight at him. The program slipped from his hand. His face drained of all color. And in that suspended moment, between his lie and her truth, every person in that room froze exactly as we knew they would. My brother stood frozen at the front of the chapel, staring at Mom as if she were an apparition dragged out of the grave. The mourners shifted in their seats, eyes widening, hands covering mouths. A few people gasped. One woman whispered a trembling prayer under her breath. The impossible was standing in front of them, alive, steady, and heartbreakingly real. Mom took another step forward. Her heels clicked against the floor, the sharp sound cutting through the silence like a blade. If anyone doubted their eyes, the sound confirmed it. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a memory. She was alive. My brother stumbled backward, bumping into the pedestal holding her photograph. The frame wobbled, threatening to fall. He choked out, his voice cracking under the weight of everything he'd built, and everything collapsing around him. Mom's expression was a painful mix of strength and sorrow. "You declared me dead," she said, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "In front of people who loved me." The guests looked between her and my brother, confused and shocked. A man in the second row whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "If she's alive, then what is this?" My brother's breath hitched. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape, a lie, a lifeline. Anything to salvage the narrative he had crafted. I don't understand," he stammered. "I thought I was told." Mom stepped closer. "Stop." That single word held decades of disappointment. "Don't lie to me in front of everyone. Not today." His jaw quivered. "I thought someone said." Mom's voice cut through him. "You told your sister I died. You arranged a funeral. You told people I wanted a private service. You erased her from your story. You erased me." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. A wave of whispers rippled through the room. People began murmuring to each other, disbelief turning into anger. A few stood up, glaring at him as though they too felt betrayed by the performance he had forced them into. "You held a funeral," Mom continued, her eyes glistening but firm. "Without confirmation. Without proof. Without care." He lifted his hands helplessly. I panicked. Things were happening I didn't mean." "You didn't mean?" Mom repeated softly. "Didn't mean to bury me alive? Didn't mean to claim everything for yourself? Didn't mean to cut your sister out because she wouldn't question you?" Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, not from grief, but from the unbearable weight of betrayal no mother should endure. I stepped beside her, placing my hand on her back in silent support. My brother's eyes flicked to me, full of desperation. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," he whispered harshly. "You weren't supposed to be here." That sentence settled over the room like ash. Mom inhaled sharply. "So you admit it?" Mom, please," he said, voice shaking. "I just needed time. Money. A chance. Everything was falling apart and I thought if I controlled the estate I could fix everything." His confession echoed across the room. Gasps erupted. Several guests stood, stepping away from him as though his greed were contagious. One elderly woman shook her head sadly. "Your mother gave you everything," she said softly. "And you repay her like this?" My brother collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't know what else to do." Mom stared at him for a long, aching moment. "I would have helped you," she whispered. "If you had just asked." Her words didn't rise in anger. They fell like a breaking heart. And in that instant the room didn't just freeze. It shattered. The funeral room was still buzzing with gasps and angry whispers when the doors at the back opened again. This time the murmurs quieted, not out of shock but out of uncertainty. Mr. Halden stepped inside, holding a neat file of documents under his arm. His presence carried a calm authority, the kind that settled the chaos instantly. My brother lifted his head, eyes widening with panic. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cracking. Halden didn't even look at him first. Instead, he approached Mom with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Hartley, I'm glad to see you well," he said gently, making sure the entire room heard it. A fresh wave of whispers swept through the mourners. Then he turned to my brother, the man whose lies were unraveling faster than he could gather them. "We need to speak," Halden said calmly. "But since you chose to involve the community, we'll address this here." My brother stood abruptly. "You don't understand. This is all a mistake." Halden opened the file. "A mistake? You attempted to access estate information last week. You requested expedited transfer of assets. You tried to schedule a funeral without a death certificate." He paused, letting the weight of each accusation settle. "And you declared your own mother deceased." My brother's face drained of color. I was misinformed. Someone told me she..." "Enough," Halden said sharply, his voice echoing through the room. "No one reported her death. No coroner. No officer. No hospital. You acted alone." A few guests murmured their agreement. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Mom's voice wavered as she stepped forward. "Why, son? Why would you do this?" He swallowed hard, but no answer came. Halden continued, flipping to another page. "I've already contacted authorities regarding the fraudulent inquiries. They're waiting outside to speak with you." My brother's eyes darted toward the exit, measuring the distance as if planning to run. But before he could take a step, two officers entered the room. One male, one female, uniforms polished, expressions serious. "Mr. Hartley," the male officer said, "we'd like to ask you a few questions about your recent activities." "No, please, this isn't necessary," my brother stammered. "I just made a mistake. A misunderstanding." "Funeral fraud," Halden said quietly, "is not a misunderstanding." The officer gestured for my brother to step aside. "We aren't arresting you at this time, but we do need information. Your mother is clearly alive, so we need to determine your intent." Mom watched him, her eyes hollow but resolute. "Intent," she whispered. "That's the word." My brother looked around the room, at the mourners who no longer pitied him, at the mother he tried to erase, at me standing beside her. And for the first time the realization hit him. His lies weren't just exposed. They were collapsing. Piece by piece. Word by word. Choice by choice. One officer led him toward the hallway. He didn't resist. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of everything he'd done had finally settled on his back. Mom exhaled slowly, grief mixing with relief. "It's over," she whispered. But I knew the truth. The funeral was over. The consequences had only begun. The funeral home slowly emptied after the officers escorted my brother away for questioning. Guests whispered in stunned clusters, exchanging wide-eyed looks as they filed out. Some hugged Mom, others apologized for believing the lie, but most simply stared at her with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. When the last of them left, Mr. Halden motioned us into a quiet private room. The door closed with a soft click, separating us from the chaos, leaving only the truth waiting on the table between us. Mom sat down first, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I took the seat beside her, while Halden positioned himself across from us and placed a thick envelope on the table. The same kind of envelope Mom had hidden beneath her dresser. The updated will. "For your safety," Halden began gently, "it's important we review this now, before your son attempts anything further." Mom nodded, her face drained but determined. "Go ahead." Halden opened the envelope and slid out the official documents. As he read through them, Mom kept her eyes on the table, almost as if she were ashamed that the decisions she'd made in private were now being exposed in the most public, painful way imaginable. "Your mother updated this will 1 month ago," Halden explained. "It reflects her current wishes. And it is fully notarized and legally binding." I glanced at Mom. She didn't look at me, but her jaw tightened slightly. The choices she had made were not easy ones. Halden continued. "Your brother is included, but only symbolically." Mom finally spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "I didn't want to cut him out entirely. Despite everything. I hoped he'd change. My heart ached for her. Even now, after he staged her death, after he publicly buried her, after he tried to erase me, she still wanted to believe there was goodness left in him. Halden cleared his throat and read the key line. To my son I leave a sentimental keepsake, chosen at my discretion. One item. No money. No assets. No property. A soft, almost tragic smile touched Mom's lips. I plan to give him your father's pocket watch, she whispered. Not for value, but for meaning. She then turned to me, eyes glistening. And everything else, the home, the savings, the investments, go to you. Not because I love you more, but because you've always carried the weight your brother refused to lift. I swallowed hard, overwhelmed. Mom, I never asked for. I know, she said. That's why you're the one who deserves it. Halden nodded solemnly. This is ironclad. He cannot contest it without exposing himself further. Mom leaned back, letting out a long, exhausted breath. For the first time since the nightmare began, both of us felt it. A shift. Not just legal protection. Not just safety. But clarity. The will wasn't about money. It was about truth. Finally spoken aloud. The sun was sinking by the time Mom and I stepped outside the funeral home. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, but neither of us felt the softness of the evening. Everything felt heavier, as though the air itself carried the weight of what had unfolded. We were walking toward the car when we heard hurried footsteps behind us. Mom, please, wait. My brother's voice. We turned. He wasn't handcuffed. The officers must have released him after questioning. But the man standing in front of us looked nothing like the polished figure who'd orchestrated a fake funeral hours earlier. His tie was crooked, his eyes red, his hands shaking at his sides. Mom, he said again, breathing hard, please, don't leave like this. Mom's expression didn't soften. Not this time. The betrayal was still too raw, too deep. What do you want? She asked quietly. He swallowed hard. I need you to listen. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I wasn't trying to. His voice cracked. I didn't think you'd ever find out. That's your defense? Mom whispered. That you hoped you'd get away with it? He flinched, his facade crumbling. Everything was falling apart. My debts. My job. I was drowning, and I thought, if I could get control of the estate, I could fix everything. I could start over. Mom shook her head slowly. So your solution was to pretend I was dead? I panicked, he cried, voice breaking. I didn't know what else to do. His desperation echoed across the parking lot, but it didn't reach her the way it used to. Not through sympathy, not through guilt, not through the unconditional forgiveness she'd given him for so many years. You could have talked to me, she said softly, painfully. I would have helped you. He wiped at his eyes angrily. I was ashamed. I didn't want you to see how badly I'd failed. And when things got worse, it just became easier to keep lying. Mom took a breath. A long, trembling breath. You didn't just lie, she said. You took my life, my trust, and your sister's place in this family, and you buried all of it so you could gain something for yourself. He closed his eyes as though the truth physically stung. I'm sorry, he whispered. Mom, I'm so sorry. Please don't give up on me. Mom stepped closer, and for a moment I wasn't sure what she would do. Her hand lifted slightly, almost in instinct, almost in forgiveness, but she let it fall back to her side. I don't hate you, she said gently. But I can't save you from this. Not anymore. His face crumpled. He looked at me then, pleading, searching for support he hadn't earned. I met his gaze steadily. You didn't just betray Mom. You tried to erase me too. He opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Mom sighed, turning away. You need help, she said. Real help. Not money. Not excuses. Help. He nodded weakly, tears slipping down his cheeks. Will you ever forgive me? Mom paused, her back to him. Someday, she whispered. But not today. Her voice carried finality, not cruelty, not anger. Just truth. And as we walked away, leaving him standing alone in the fading light, it became clear. This chapter of our family hadn't ended with anger. It ended with consequence. The days following the confrontation unfolded quietly, like the air after a long storm, heavy but finally still. Mom stayed with me for a few nights, not because she needed protection, but because the house she'd lived in for decades suddenly felt foreign. Too many shadows. Too many memories now stained by my brother's choices. In my home she seemed lighter. She woke early, cooked breakfast, watered my plants, rearranged my spice cabinet twice. Small signs of a woman trying to reclaim pieces of normal life, one gentle task at a time. I let her have the space. She had earned that comfort. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sky fade into soft blues and purples, she finally spoke about everything that had happened. "I always thought my job as a mother was to shield him," she murmured. "To fix his mistakes before they could break him." She shook her head slowly. "But maybe protecting him for so long made him believe he could take without giving." I rested my hand on hers. "You didn't fail him," I said softly. "He failed himself. And he tried to take you down with him." She nodded, though sadness lingered in her eyes. "I hope one day he understands the damage he caused." "He will," I said. "He has to. Consequences teach what comfort never could." We fell into a quiet silence, letting the cool evening breeze settle around us. For the first time since the nightmare began, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger either. What I felt was clarity, sharp, steady, necessary. A week later, Halden finalized the paperwork ensuring full legal protection for Mom and me. My brother, meanwhile, was given mandatory counseling and a financial audit. Not prison, not punishment, just accountability. A chance to face his own reflection without the lies he'd wrapped himself in for years. Mom visited him one afternoon. When she returned, her eyes were red but her shoulders relaxed. "He cried," she whispered. "Real tears. The first I've seen from him in a long time." She looked at me with quiet strength. "He's broken. But maybe breaking was necessary." As weeks passed, life settled into a new rhythm. Mom regained her laughter, her energy, her confidence. She helped me repaint the living room, cooked her favorite recipes, and insisted on reorganizing my entire pantry for efficiency. One night, as we ate dinner together, she touched my hand gently. "You saved me," she said. "Not from him, but from believing I had to suffer quietly." I smiled. "You saved yourself. I just stood beside you." And as I looked at her, alive, present, stronger than ever, I realized something certain and profound. Sometimes the real inheritance isn't money or property. Sometimes the real inheritance is clarity, courage, and the freedom to begin again.